Okay, welcome back. We are on the last video where we're discussing adjectival clauses, And we've learned a lot about adjective clauses already, okay? But we're going to talk about one more thing, and this is a very long video, so I recommend grabbing the popcorn, making sure you've read the material first, listened in class as we've gone over it, and this is a review. If this is the first time you've heard it and you haven't prepared for this video, you might be confused, and so you're going to have to do this work on your own also. Listen in class as I've explained it. Read the sections on your own and try to cipher through it, and then also watch the video, okay? We're going to get into a little bit more technical definitions. We're going to talk about two types of adjective. So far we've talked about adjective clauses. Now we're going to talk about whether they're restrictive or non-restrictive adjective clauses, okay? And just a little heads up. Remember when we were deciding whether to use the word that or which for non-human things, for non-human, and I said to always use that for now, okay? Now we're going to actually distinguish when to use the word that and when to set out the adjective clause with the word which, all right? And basically, before we get started, I'm going to tell you straight up that when you have a restrictive adjective clause, you're always going to use the word that. When you have a non-restrictive adjective clause, you're always going to use the word which. All right. Now that's you'll always be safe if you follow this rule. Okay. Native speakers will switch between them properly, but I'm not going to get into all the little tiny rules that govern that. I'm just going to tell you straight up that if you follow this rule, that you always use the word that with restrictive adjective clauses and use which with non-restrictive adjective clauses, that you will always be correct and your writing will always be there won't be a mistake in it, okay? So what is a restrictive adjective clause? That's the question that we're going to answer first. So don't worry about that or which yet. Okay, we're going to get to that later. Don't worry about the word that or which. We're just going to figure out how to identify a restrictive clause and how to identify a non-restrictive clause. Okay? So let's take a look here, and I'm going to read some of these things to you. It says, all adjective clauses modify the nouns that they follow. They're antecedents, okay? However, not all adjective clauses are equal. Some adjective clauses significantly restrict or limit the meaning of the nouns they modify, and these are called restrictive. And some are called non-restrictive. They do not affect the meaning of the nouns they modify at all. They just give additional information, okay? So those are big words there. So let's take a look at some examples. Oops. One second here. Okay, let's take a look at some examples here. It says, here are some examples of restricted and non-restricted clauses. And we're going to come down here where you can see them a little bit. They're a little small. The house that is on the corner of Elm and 17th is for sale. Okay, this is a restrictive clause. It tells a lot about the house. If we say it without there, the house is for sale. Well, it just changed that is a proper sentence, but it changed the meaning of the sentence. We no longer know which house is for sale. We just know that a house is for sale. So this is called a restrictive clause right here because this tells me exactly which house is for sale, and without that clause there, I don't know which house is for sale, therefore I've lost the meaning of the sentence, okay? So that's what restrictive is. It clarifies which house, It's essential. You must know which house is for sale. Here's a non-restrictive clause, which means that it's not necessary to understand the meaning of the sentence. Our house, which is on the corner of Elm and 17th Street, is for sale. So without that clause, our house is for sale. Does that have the same meaning? Our house, do I know which house is for sale? Yes, our house is. All right? I give additional information about my house. It's located on the corner of Elm and 17th Street. But that doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. It tells me where my house is, but I still know my house is for sale, or which house is for sale, without that clause there. That is what we call a non-restrictive clause. It gives additional information about house, but it's not essential to the meaning of the sentence. Okay? So that's what we talk about with essential and non-essential. So let's take a look a little bit further. We're going to pick apart these examples further, I believe. Okay. If we delete it, for example, the house is for sale. We've already said that we don't know which house is for sale. So that was an essential, a restrictive clause, right? And in this one, we said it was non-essential because non-restrictive because our house is for sale. Even without knowing where the house is, we still know whose house is for sale, which house is for sale. Okay, so that's what we call the non-essential. Now, we're not going to read this. You can look at the examples of restrictive and non-restrictive clauses. The thing that you need to understand, though, and we're going to go through several examples together, is, when to use that and which we'll get to in a second. And also, when to use commas and when not to. And when to use commas. Okay, so as I walk through these examples with you in the exercises, we're going to be discussing these things. Which ones are restrictive? What makes them restrictive? And whether or non-restrictive. And when I use commas and when I use that or which, okay? All right, so let's go ahead. And you can read these. I'm not going to you can read those things if you want about how native speakers interchange them and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just going to walk you through some examples here. It says, here are 2 tips that will make the choice between restrictive and non-restrictive clauses somewhat easier. Okay, first tip. It follows from the definitions given earlier that proper nouns can only be modified by non-restrictive adjective clauses. So if you have a proper noun, like it's emphasized, like it's capitalized, like a person's name, they can only be modified by non-restrictive adjective clauses. It says the reason is simple. A proper noun always refers to one specific person, place, or thing. Since adding an adjective clause can never change who or what that person or place or thing is, all adjective modifiers of proper nouns must be non-restrictive. Okay? And here are some examples. Mr. Thompson, who teaches English at my school, used to live in Peru. Now let's take a look at this. Mr. Thompson. Let's take a look at another one actually, so I don't have to keep flipping back and forth. Okay, it says Mr. Thompson, whom we all adored, finally retired this year. Okay, well, the first thing I want to show you is that because it's non-essential, doesn't change it. Mr. Thompson finally retired this year. Well, we have additional information, whom we all adored, but it's not important to the overall meaning. I still know that Mr. Thompson retired even if this adjective clause isn't here. Okay, we call that non-restrictive. It's a non-restrictive clause. It's not necessary. There's two things. Well, in this sentence, there's one thing that's going to tell you it's not necessary. If it's non-essential, you always separate that off by commas. If it's non-essential, you always use commas. Okay? So that's important to understand as well. If it's non-essential, you always use commas. Okay? Let's take a look at another one. The Empire State Building, proper noun, was coming as an non-essential clause. It's non-essential, so I use the word which. That's when I use the word which, when it's non-essential. Which is now the tallest building in New York, and because it's also non-essential, I set off the adjective clause with commas. Okay? Okay, how about this one? The Shadow Cafe. Once again, the antecedent is a proper noun. It's capitalized. So I already know that this relative clause coming up is non-essential. If it's non-essential, obviously, or non-restrictive, I should say, obviously I set it off by commas. Okay? How about this one? The year 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, is probably the most important year in American history. Well, I already know that the year 1776 is the most important year in American history. I don't need anything else that tells me. So this is a non-essential clause. The rest of this is non-essential. It tells me more about 1776 is why it's important, but I don't lose the meaning of the sentence. So I have to separate these off by commas. All right? It's non-restrictive. All right. Well, let's take a look at a couple more things. Okay. And then the second tip. Common nouns that are used with an indefinite article a or an or some will normally take restrictive adjectives. Okay, so anytime you have a common noun that's used with the article a, an, or some, all right, it will almost always take a restrictive adjective. That's because, why do we know that? Because we use a or an or some when we don't know which specific noun they're talking about, correct? It's the indefinite article. So we need clarification on which thing they're talking about. So we're going to restrict that noun further so we understand which one they're talking about, okay? And so it would take a restrictive, we'd want to clarify it, okay? So let's take a look at here at these examples. And these are clauses. And I'm going to show you a difference here. Every morning at 7, a church, which church? That is in the neighborhood, rings its bell. Oh, every morning at 7, a church, we want to clarify which church, that is in the neighborhood, rings a bell. Okay, now this is not a church right here. I need to clarify which church. So I say that is in the neighborhood. That's the restrictive clause. I must have that in there so I don't lose the meaning of the sentence. Okay? Because it's restrictive, I want you to notice that we do not use commas here, do we? No. It's essential to the meaning of the sentence. I do not put commas there because I have to have that phrase there to understand the sentence. All right? And of course, I also use the word that. So restrictive clauses use the word that, and I don't use commas. Non-restrictive clauses use the word which, and I use the word, and I have commas in front of it. Okay? Let me take a look here. He takes a pill. Oops. Indefinite article. I have to have the restrictive clause to tell me which pill. That reduces his blood pressure. Oops. Two things. It's restrictive, so it uses the word that. And also, I don't use commas, do I? Because it's a restrictive adjective clause. It must be there so I understand the meaning of the sentence. Okay? He takes a pill is not the same meaning. It doesn't give me all the picture as he takes a pill that reduces blood pressure. Okay? How about this one? Do you know a store, which store, that would carry a computer accessories? Okay. Restrictive, you use the word that, and you don't see any commas at all, do you? Okay. So you can go ahead and read through those. I'm going to go on. Since we typically use restrictive adjective clauses with nouns modified by indefinite articles, it is tempting to leap to the generalization that we must use non-restrictive clauses with nouns modified by definite articles, but that's not true, okay? This is definitely not the case. Nouns modified by definite articles can use either type of clause. They can either use a restrictive or a non-restrictive. So we're going to look at those. The contracts that are approved by the board are binding. Which contracts are binding? Only those approved by the board. So you can see that is definitely needed. It's a restrictive clause. It does not use commas. This is non-restrictive. The contracts are binding. Which contracts? Well, all of them. Okay, the contracts are binding. They don't non-essential, which are approved by the board. Okay. So it can be either or, I guess. You have to decide what's important. Okay. If it's non-restrictive, you use the word which, and you'd have to use commas. I don't understand that one because it's the same thing, but I think what they're trying to say is that sometimes it's a matter of judgment. You have to decide if it's restrictive, important to the meaning of the sentence, or if it can be taken out. Okay, so I think that's the important thing to understand is sometimes it's a judgment call. Okay, so let's take a look at this. It says. Underline all the adjective clauses in the following sentences. Write restrictive or non-restrictive about each clause as appropriate, and then add commas if the clause is non-restrictive. Okay, so let's take a look here. Queen Latifah, who is best known as a rap artist, is a successful actress. Queen Latifah is a common or a proper noun. I know that it has to be non-essential. Okay, non-restrictive. So Queen Latifah, who was known as a rap artist, is now a successful actress. Okay, let's go through here and see. I think there's I don't know how many of them you have to do. You have to do 25 of them. So we're going to do maybe the first 10 together even, so that you have 15 on your own to do. Okay, so let's take a look at here and see what we have. Okay, let's meet at the restaurant where we had dinner last night. Okay, first thing I need to decide is this clause restrictive or non-restrictive? Okay, restrictive or non-restrictive? Which means, is it does it have to be there for me to understand the sentence? Let's meet at the restaurant. Well, okay, you would ask me which restaurant. So I would have to tell you which restaurant. So this has to be restrictive. Okay, this is a restrictive. It's essential to the meaning of the sentence. Let's meet at the restaurant where we had dinner last night. Now you know exactly which restaurant. You understand the meaning of the sentence. This, where we had dinner last night, you must have that information to know which restaurant. Okay, so I'm going to say that this is a restrictive clause. I do not use commas. Okay, so I'm going to underline this, and I'm going to write it's restrictive. Okay, how about this one? Strangely enough, houses that are made of wood often survive earthquakes better than houses made of concrete. So where is the restrictive or non-restrictive clause? Strangely enough, Houses that are made of wood often survive earthquakes better than houses made of concrete. Strangely enough, houses that are made of wood. Well, I would say that it has to be essential. That are made of wood. Because better than those, better than houses made of concrete. I would have to say this is essential because it wouldn't make sense if you didn't have that there. Strangely enough, houses often survive earthquakes better than houses made of concrete. Yeah, we have to know there's a comparison contrast there, so it's definitely restrictive and no commas are needed. Let's take a look at this one. My roommate, whom I knew in high school, is from Yemen. Well, my roommate is from Yemen. Okay? Does this change the meaning of the sentence, whom I knew in high school? Do I still know that my roommate is from Yemen even if I don't tell you this? Yes. So this is what we call non-restrictive. Well, I'm going to have to put my commas. Means I can pull that out. It's not essential. And I'm going to write non-restrictive above it. Non-restrictive means it's not necessary. Okay. Well, let's take a look at, we're going to do a couple more together. The forests that grow in the Pacific Northwest are mostly conifers. The forests are mostly conifers. Well, which forests? There's all kinds of forests all over the world. Oh, the ones that grow in the Pacific Northwest. I would say that this is definitely a restrictive clause. It tells me what I need to know, which forests, okay? Not just forests in general. So I would have to have that so I didn't lose the meaning of the sentence, all right? Because most forests are not conifers, just the ones in the Pacific Northwest. All right. How about this one? The economics test that we just took was harder than I expected it to be. I think this would be a matter of opinion, but I'm going to tell you right now because they use the word that. We already know that that is used with restrictive clauses. Okay. The economics test was harder than I expected it to be. Well, this would be a restrictive because we need to know which one. Okay, that we just took. So it's restrictive. How about this one? I live in a small town that is on the Mississippi River. Probably I would need this. Number one, it's restrictive because it uses the word that, but it tells me which small town. Okay. My boss, who commutes an hour each way, likes to work from home when she can. My boss likes to work from home. Do I care that she commutes an hour each way? It's not important to the sentence. I just know that she likes to work from home. So I would call that a non-restrictive clause, and I would separate it off by commas. Okay? So non-restrictive. I'm underlining the clause here. Okay? I'll get rid of the other one because that's not the clause. Okay? The computer that I use at work is not capable of running the program that I need. The computer is not capable of running the program that I need, but I would probably need to know which computer. Two things tell me this is restrictive. Number one, it has that, which means it's restrictive. Number two, I need to know which computer can't run the program, okay? The one at work, all right? So we're going to do two more. And if you're having questions or difficulties, please come by before or after school and we'll talk about this and do this together. It says, Mr. Brown, who works for our parent company, will be visiting us next week. It's a proper noun. Anything that comes after it is non-restrictive, okay? Who works for our parent company? Set it off by commas, okay? And I'm going to underline the, I'm going to underline the adjective clause, okay? It's non-restrictive. It means it's set off by commas, okay? Mr. Brown will be visiting us next week. Mr. Brown, who works for our parent company, will be visiting next week. It doesn't change who Mr. Brown is. Okay, so it's just additional information, non-restrictive. So I'd write that. The euro-dollar exchange rate, which has fluctuated wildly lately, is the topic of today's presentation. The euro-dollar exchange rate is the topic of today's presentation. Well, this which has fluctuated widely, well, number one, which is always used with non-restrictive clauses, okay? So I know that it's non-restrictive, so I'm going to put commas around it. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this. And I also have to know, this is the clause. I also have to know that I don't have to know it fluctuated wildly to know that the euro dollar is the topic of today's presentation. Okay, it's non-restrictive. It's extra information. I don't need it. So it's non-restrictive. Two things about non-restrictive clauses, adjective clauses. Number one, they are always separated off by commas. Okay, and they usually use, when appropriate, they usually use the word which. Okay, if you have to choose between which or that, that is always used with restrictive, no commas, and which is always used with commas, restrictive, or non-restrictive, sorry. Which is always non-restrictive. And of course, if which is used, I always use commas because I don't need it. Okay, so good luck. And like I said before, come before or after school and I will help you out if you need it. And this basically is the last video of our unit on adjective clauses. I hope that you understand the difference between a clause and a phrase. Remember, a clause has subject-verb agreement. A phrase does not have subject-verb relationship. It just has a subject. Okay? I'll see you in the next video where we talk about gerunds. Okay?